Well, Sam, I think one of the things that everyone in the world realizes is that the response of both the United States and the state of Florida to COVID 19 has been political and not science based. That the reelection of the administration and the stock market actually took precedence over uh, public health. And we had a situation where the administration, the president, did not use powers that were within his control to actually mobilize the private sector to assist government in addressing the uh, personal protection needs and other aspects of public health to deal with the uh, virus spread. We now have nationwide spread of the coronavirus, more so than in many other countries in the entire world. And on Wednesday, we hit an all-time high of 114,000 new cases. And yesterday, it went to 121,000 cases. Yesterday in Florida, we had 6,257 cases and 39 deaths. In the United States, as you know, we have had over 235,000 deaths, and the U.S. total on cases is now almost 10 million, with a very disturbing 250,000 new cases on college campuses. This is a large percentage of the entire world population statistics, and I think that depending upon the outcome of the election, we will see if we have the president reelected, a vaccine and a hope approach with herd immunity. And if Biden is elected, the former vice president, I think we will see a move toward mask requirements and social distancing, and actually a strategy for how the public sector and private sector will address COVID. I think one of the biggest issues that we face with PPP and redevelopment is the clauses in many agreements that really are what are called act of God or force majeure, which means that if a unforeseen quote unquote act of God occurs, the parties are no longer bound by the agreement. And so right now, there are thousands of agreements for redevelopment between state and local government that are being impacted because they cannot move forward, either because of the lack of financial resources on the government to keep its part, or on the private sector to actually be able to perform because of illnesses among staff, because of the inability, because of social distancing and because of lockdowns, to actually bring the resources together to perform. And so we are going to see at the local government level likely a substantial delay in the implementation of existing PPP, but we are actually going to see an evolution of new PPP approaches where, in order for government to provide critical services digitally, they're going to have to partner with the private sector to provide the capacity for public hearings, for review of permits, and even the operation of our court system. In addition, this digital world that we're living in is going to force a reevaluation by local government of land use regulations because of the work at home limitations that current zoning ordinances have about businesses which require people to come to your house being illegal in many neighborhoods. In addition, we are going to see a surplus of office space as businesses begin to realize, because of the remote ability of their employees to work, that they won't need as much office space. And so it is interesting to see the different corporations that are now negotiating with local government to provide digitally related services. I myself am involved in another kind of unique reverse PPP, where I am working with a developer that actually owns 1,300 low-income housing units in the city of Fort Lauderdale and in Hollywood, Florida, 300 of them in Hollywood, which is currently in negotiation with the city. This is a developer, third generation of non-subsidized private sector working poor housing, where none of the residents receive any government subsidy, and the developer, his grandfather who built the homes 60 to 70 years ago, his father, now him, and soon his daughters, will be running this company that is now facing financial stress because of the loss of jobs of many of the residents. And so the municipality, which seeks to keep this supply of affordable housing, is working with the developer, which is Collins Apartments in Hollywood, to actually revise regulations which may provide incentives so that the developer will be able to afford to do the redevelopment of their private affordable housing, because it provides a critical, quote unquote, governmental need for this category of low income housing. And so there's interesting things going on at all levels of government, and we'll probably talk in a minute, but the lack of an effective national plan has forced the local governments to look to their prefectures, their counties, or their governors for some kind of relief under both the distribution of federal money through the CARES Act, and we'll talk about that, or through state programs which assist local government. Well, what's interesting is, because of the widespread COVID-19 in the United States, we really don't have a containment strategy under the current administration. And so the idea that we would allow infections to occur and protect the vulnerable and hope that a vaccine will come to the rescue creates concern on the parts of so many about investing in a long-term partnership, because we don't know about the workforce yet. We actually don't know about the reaction of the financial markets. And there is a definite need for a national plan to deal with the widespread nature of the current COVID. And we really need to look at leadership and not politics. Because remember my keynote speech at the 13th annual PPP conference that we had at Toyo? I said there was a fourth P in PPP, public-private partnership, and that fourth P is patience. And the real problem is that patience requires that each side will be able to understand what the future will bring. You can have patience when you know and can see the horizon. Well, let's look at one major issue in PPP, and that is money. Right now in the United States, money is almost free. The interest rate is basically zero. A local government can borrow substantial amounts of money, and the capital markets have the money. And so the reality of a PPP is, given the limitations of municipal budgets, to hire staff and to actually engage in these projects. Now, Sam, we must remember that most large infrastructure projects are not done by the government, they're done by government contractors. And so it's always been, in effect, a government contracting with the private sector, but there has never been a sharing of risk in many of these instances. As we know in the state of Florida, with the expansion of the interstate highway system, 595 going from Fort Lauderdale to Weston, this is a complete PPP, and tolls were used as the basis of reimbursing the private sector. We saw the privatization of parking meters in Chicago as a PPP. There's so many interesting ways to do this, but the key to remember is that money is readily available if there is some viable financial plan that it gets paid back. So the private sector, using the low cost of money, can work with government, and government can provide land, government can provide the expedited permitting, and government can provide a toll mechanism or some other revenue generation to pay back the private sector, and the private sector can be on the hook for the loan in order to, or borrow the money themselves in order to move this forward. And so I see the creativity of the American government to be, and the private sector, to be able to come together to provide an infrastructure program like we have not seen since we came out of the Great Recession. Well, you know, in looking at the experience of the UN and what is it, the SDG Goal 17 on sustainability, you know, what you see is a recognition, at least if you took a look at the approach of the UN, it's either pay now or pay later. And what the UN is saying is that if we don't pay now, the cost is going to be substantially greater to fix the damage that is being caused. Now, we in Miami were involved very heavily in the 100 Cities program of the Rockefeller Fund in trying to share best practices for resiliency. And I really do believe that when we talk about financing redevelopment, when we talk about financing, I mean, you said, you know, right here in Florida, on days when there's even high tide now, the streets of Miami are flooded, and we have pumps going all the time. The Gulf of Mexico has now had more storms already, and we have another one coming this weekend, another tropical depression. We ran out of names and had to go to the Greek alphabet because we've had so many storms this year. And so it is true that resiliency is the new growth management, smart growth term, and numerous local governments are actually willing to bond monies to pay for the more expensive, quote unquote, hardening of the infrastructure. You know, for example, in areas of the city of Miami, the most expensive neighborhoods, large lot development, which has been meant to keep out less expensive homes because you need so much acreage, all of that is on septic tank. And so now what happens is whenever the tide comes in, the septic tanks don't work. And you can smell it in the neighborhoods. And these are $1 million homes. And so there's a recognition that now finally sewer has to be provided. But the cost of sewer comes with the question of how you pay for it, and it relates to density. And so now we're having the question of, yes, you can do resiliency, but how do you fairly pay for running the sewer lines, putting in the bulkheads, dealing with the mitigation of pollutants. And it's interesting that America is a experimentation of 50 states and over 10,000 local governments. And when we talk about best practices, it's the same as the SDG goals of the UN. You look at what's happening around the world, you pick what has been successful, and you try to modify it within the legal and cultural restrictions of jurisdictions that actually can successfully apply best management practices from other locations.